My ex used me for money while I worked nights, then left for someone rich, so I won custody, cut ties, and healed alone quietly. I'm a 26-year-old guy, and for most of my early 20s, I genuinely believed real love meant staying quiet when you were tired and pushing through when your body begged you to stop. I thought if I could just endure a little more than everyone else, the people I loved would be safe, happy, and loyal. That belief shaped every decision I made back then, even the ones that slowly hollowed me out. I met my ex when we were both broke, living on instant noodles and big dreams. We used to sit on the floor of our tiny apartment, backs against the couch, talking about the future like it was a guaranteed destination. One day, she'd say, smiling, "We'll laugh about how hard this was." I believed her. I wanted to be the man who made that future possible. So I worked. Nights at a warehouse, lifting until my arms shook, then grabbing day jobs whenever I could. I'd come home as the sun was coming up, clothes smelling like sweat and dust, my head buzzing from lack of sleep. I'd collapse on the bed for a couple of hours, then get back up. Exhausted, yes, but proud. Proud that the rent was paid. Proud that the fridge wasn't empty. She stayed home more and more. "I'm planning our future," she'd say, scrolling on her phone. Or, "I just need time to recover from stress." If an emergency popped up, a bill, groceries, something breaking, it was on me. Always on me. And I told myself that's what partnership looked like. Then our child was born, and something in me locked into place. Fear. Love. Responsibility so heavy it felt physical. I doubled down, ignored the warning signs from my body, ignored the quiet voice asking how long I could keep this up. Because I thought I was building a family. I didn't realize yet that I was also teaching someone exactly how much I was willing to give, and how little I expected back. The change didn't happen all at once. It crept in quietly, disguised as exhaustion and normal relationship stress, the kind people warn you about but never explain. At first, it was just her tone. Shorter replies. Less eye contact. When I came home in the morning, dead on my feet, she wouldn't ask how my shift went anymore. She'd just glance up and say, "You're late," like I'd been out doing something wrong. I started noticing how often she sighed around me. How she flinched when I tried to talk about my day. "All you ever talk about is work," she snapped once, not even looking at me. I remember standing in the kitchen, hands still shaking from lifting boxes all night, thinking, "I'm only working like this because of you." But I swallowed it. I always swallowed it. She began spending hours on social media, watching videos of couples traveling, luxury apartments, men surprising women with gifts I couldn't afford. "I just like watching," she said when I asked. "It motivates me." But then the comments started. "Must be nice to have a man who actually enjoys life." Or, "Some guys know how to hustle smarter, not harder." Each one landed like a quiet accusation. When I tried to explain how tired I was, how stretched thin everything felt, she rolled her eyes. "Everyone's tired," she said. "You're not special." The words stuck to me. I stopped talking about my body hurting. Stopped mentioning how my chest felt tight some nights. I didn't want to be another problem she had to deal with. She also started going out more. "Just to clear my head," she'd say, grabbing her keys. Sometimes she wouldn't come back until after midnight. If I asked where she'd been, she'd laugh softly and say, "You're being dramatic. Don't start." So I didn't start. I told myself love meant trust. That my discomfort was just insecurity. That if I worked harder, slept less, provided more, she'd feel safe again. I didn't realize I was slowly being compared to a version of a man I could never become, or that someone else was already filling in those blanks when I wasn't around. The money started disappearing in ways that were hard to explain, but easy to excuse if you didn't want to see the truth. It was never one big thing, never something dramatic enough to justify a fight. Just little withdrawals. New subscriptions. Charges from places I'd never been. When I asked, she always had an answer ready, like she'd rehearsed it. "It's for the house. It's for the baby. It's temporary." I began skipping meals without telling her. Not because we couldn't afford food, but because it felt easier to tighten my own belt than to start another argument. I'd stand in the warehouse break room at 3 a.m., staring at vending machine snacks I couldn't justify buying, telling myself hunger was just another thing I could push through. Sacrifice had become muscle memory. Whenever I brought up finances, her voice would sharpen instantly. "Why are you monitoring me?" she snapped one night, arms crossed, eyes cold. "I'm not monitoring," I said quietly. "I just don't understand where the money's going." She laughed, actually laughed, and said, "Wow. So now you're controlling too?" That word, controlling, hit harder than any insult. It made me feel ashamed for even asking. I apologized. Again. I promised I'd do better. Meanwhile, she ordered new clothes, upgraded her phone, talked about things she needed to feel like herself again. I told myself a happy partner meant a stable family. I started noticing how she never worried. Not about bills. Not about emergencies. Not about me collapsing on the couch, barely able to keep my eyes open. If the account dipped low, she'd just say, "You'll figure it out. You always do." And I did. Extra shifts. Less sleep. More pain. At home, I tried to hide my stress from our child. I'd smile through the exhaustion, read bedtime stories with a hoarse voice, pretending everything was fine. Inside, I felt like I was bleeding out slowly, quietly, where no one could see. What I didn't realize then was that this wasn't carelessness. It wasn't ignorance. It was comfort. She had learned something important about me, that I would drain myself completely before ever saying no. And once someone learns that about you, they start treating you like an unlimited resource. By the time my body finally gave out, I'd already learned how to ignore pain like it was background noise. That's probably why I didn't even realize something was seriously wrong until I woke up on a concrete floor at work, fluorescent lights buzzing above me, my supervisor crouched next to my head asking if I could hear him. My chest felt tight, my arms numb, my shirt soaked through with sweat that wasn't from labor anymore. At the hospital, the doctor spoke slowly, carefully. "You're running on fumes," he said. "Sleep deprivation. Stress. This doesn't end well if you don't change something." I nodded, embarrassed, like I'd been caught failing a test. When I told my ex what happened, she went quiet for a second. Then she asked, "So, when can you go back to work?" I laughed, because I thought she was joking. She wasn't. At home, nothing changed. No extra help. No concern when I flinched lifting our child because my muscles screamed in protest. She'd glance at me and say, "You're always so dramatic lately." If I tried to rest, she'd sigh loudly, muttering about how she was doing everything alone, even though I was still paying for everything. I told myself endurance would earn loyalty. That if I could just prove how committed I was, she'd feel it. I pushed harder. Picked up more hours. Drank energy drinks until my hands shook. Some nights I sat in my car before going inside, forehead resting against the steering wheel, trying to summon the energy to pretend I was okay. The only place I felt anything close to peace was with my child. Holding them at night, feeling their tiny breaths against my chest, I'd promised silently, "I'll never let you feel alone." That promise kept me going when nothing else could. But looking back, I see it clearly now. My collapse didn't scare her because it didn't threaten her comfort. And somewhere deep down, a question started forming that I was too afraid to ask yet: what happens to someone like me when they finally can't give anymore? The first real crack didn't come with screaming or slammed doors. It came in small moments that felt wrong but easy to ignore if you were desperate to keep the peace. One night, after another 12-hour shift, I noticed she'd changed the password on her phone. She used to toss it on the couch without a thought. Now it never left her hand. When I asked about it, I tried to sound casual. "Hey, did you change your passcode?" She didn't even look up. "Yeah." "Why?" Her tone was sharp, defensive. "Just asking," I said, already retreating. She scoffed. "You're not one of those guys who goes through phones, right?" The way she said it made me feel dirty for even noticing. She started dressing differently too. Not just nicer, intentional. Makeup done even when she was just running errands. New outfits I didn't remember paying for. When I mentioned it, she smiled at herself in the mirror and said, "Am I not allowed to look good?" I backed off instantly, guilt flooding my chest. Then there were the calls. She'd step outside to answer them, voice low, laughter soft and unfamiliar. If I walked near, she'd turn away. "It's nothing," she'd say later. "You're reading into things because you're stressed." And maybe I was. I was exhausted enough to doubt my own instincts. One night, I woke up around 2 a.m. to check on our child and realized she wasn't in bed. I found her sitting in the living room, phone glowing in the dark, smiling at something on the screen. When she noticed me, the smile vanished instantly. "Why are you creeping around?" she snapped. I apologized. Again. After that, I stopped asking questions. Stopped pointing things out. I told myself love meant trust, not interrogation. That suspicion would poison whatever we had left. So I chose silence. But that silence wasn't peace. It was me slowly surrendering my intuition, piece by piece, while something else was quietly growing in the space I refused to look at. I didn't find out because I went looking. That's the part that still messes with my head. I wasn't snooping, wasn't plotting, wasn't even suspicious enough to dig. The truth tripped over itself and landed right in front of me on a random Tuesday morning when her phone lit up on the kitchen counter while she was in the shower. I was making a bottle for our child, half asleep, moving on autopilot. Her screen flashed with a name I didn't recognize and a message preview that stopped me cold. "Last night was perfect. I wish you didn't have to go back to him." My stomach dropped so fast I thought I might throw up right there on the floor. I told myself not to touch the phone. I stood there for a full minute, heart pounding in my ears, arguing with myself. "You're overreacting. There's an explanation." But my hands were already shaking as I unlocked it. She'd never changed the passcode, just wanted me to think she had. The messages were all there. Weeks. Months. Photos I'd never seen her take. Voice notes where she laughed in a way I hadn't heard in years. And then the details started lining up, the late nights, the new clothes, the money. He wasn't just someone else. He was wealthy. Trips. Restaurants I'd only driven past. Conversations about potential and alignment. One message burned into my brain: I can't stay stuck forever. I deserve better. I knew exactly who she meant by stuck. When she came out of the shower, towel wrapped around her hair, she froze when she saw my face. "Why are you holding my phone?" she asked, calm but sharp. I handed it to her without a word. She skimmed for maybe 5 seconds, then sighed. "I didn't plan for you to find out like this," she said. No apology. No panic. Just inconvenience. I asked, quietly, "How long?" She shrugged. "Does it matter?" That was the moment something inside me cracked open and went completely numb. I realized I hadn't been competing for her love. I'd been financing her transition. And as she started explaining why this just happened, all I could think was how carefully she'd waited, until she no longer needed me. Once the truth was out, everything moved fast, too fast for me to process. There was no begging, no tears, no attempt to soften the blow. She shifted straight into exit mode, like this was a business decision she'd already finalized. "I think it's best if we separate for now," she said, folding clothes into a suitcase with mechanical calm. "This environment isn't healthy anymore." I stood in the doorway watching her pack, my chest tight, my mind lagging behind reality. "So that's it?" I asked. "After everything?" She didn't look up. "I've been unhappy for a long time," she replied, like that explained months of lies. When I mentioned the nights, the money, the sacrifices, she snapped, "You chose to do those things. Don't put that on me." That sentence erased me. Years of effort reduced to a personal flaw. She told me she'd be staying with a friend for a while. I didn't ask which one. Part of me already knew. What hurt more was how confidently she talked about our child. "They'll obviously stay with me," she said, casually, like it was common sense. "I need stability right now." I almost laughed. Stability, paid for by me, outsourced to someone richer. Within days, the apartment felt hollow. Drawers emptied. Closet space cleared. She took things I'd paid for and left behind things that reminded her of me. The silence she left was heavier than any argument we'd ever had. I still went to work. Still came home. Still made bottles and bedtime promises like nothing had changed. But something had. I started noticing details I'd ignored before: missed pickups, hours she was unreachable, the way our child clung to me when she was around. I began writing things down without really knowing why. Dates. Times. Conversations. Instinct took over where denial used to live. She thought the hardest part was over. Thought she'd extracted what she needed and could walk away clean. What she didn't realize was that once I stopped trying to save the relationship, my focus shifted somewhere else entirely. And quietly, without telling her, I stopped being the man she could afford to underestimate. The night she finally took the last of her things, the apartment didn't feel empty, it felt abandoned. Like a place people used to live in, not somewhere life still happened. I sat on the floor after putting our child to sleep, back against the wall, staring at the marks where furniture used to be. My phone buzzed with overdue notifications, bank alerts, reminders I couldn't afford to deal with yet. I checked my account and felt my stomach twist. Almost nothing left. No safety net. No backup. Just rent, bills, and a body that felt like it was falling apart faster than I could patch it together. I remember pressing my palms into my eyes, trying to breathe through the panic, telling myself not to cry because crying wouldn't fix anything. I didn't feel angry yet. I felt stupid. Used. Replaceable. Like I'd given my best years, my health, my sleep, my sense of self, and somehow still failed. The worst part wasn't that she left. It was realizing how little I had left once she was gone. Some nights, after my child was asleep, I'd sit in the dark and replay every moment, searching for the exact point where I stopped being enough. I stopped answering texts from friends. I didn't want advice or pity. I just wanted the noise in my head to stop. There was one night I stood in the shower long after the water went cold, forehead against the tile, feeling completely hollow. I remember thinking, if I disappear right now, would anyone even notice? The thought scared me, not because it felt dramatic, but because it felt quiet and reasonable. What pulled me back wasn't hope. It was responsibility. I walked into my child's room and watched them sleep, chest rising and falling steadily, unaware of how close I was to breaking. I realized something painful and simple: I was all they had right now. That was rock bottom. Not the betrayal. Not the poverty. It was the understanding that no one was coming to rescue me, and that if I didn't stand up, my child would fall with me. And in that silence, something shifted, not into strength yet, but into survival. I didn't wake up one day feeling strong. There was no sudden motivation, no inspirational turning point. What changed was smaller and colder. I stopped asking why she did it and started asking what I needed to do next. Pain was still there, heavy and constant, but it stopped running the show. It started with a notebook. Nothing dramatic, just a cheap one from a gas station. I began writing things down at night after my child fell asleep. Dates she didn't show up. Messages that felt off. Times she said she'd take our child and didn't. I told myself it was just to clear my head, but deep down, I think I already knew I was preparing for something. I went back through bank statements, scrolling slowly, feeling my jaw tighten as patterns emerged. Money spent while she claimed she was at home. Transfers that lined up with her disappearing acts. I screenshot everything, saved backups, emailed copies to myself like I was afraid the truth might vanish if I didn't lock it down. I stopped confronting her. That was the hardest part. Every instinct screamed to argue, to demand accountability, to make her see what she'd done. But I'd learned something important: she didn't care about my pain, only her comfort. So I went quiet. Polite. Neutral. When she texted, I replied with facts only. When she pushed buttons, I didn't react. The first time I met with a lawyer, my hands were shaking. I almost canceled. I felt like I didn't deserve to take up space in an office like that. But as I explained my situation, something unexpected happened. The lawyer didn't look surprised. Not even a little. "This is more common than you think," she said gently. "And you're doing the right thing by documenting." For the first time in a long time, I felt something close to control. I rebuilt my routine around consistency: same bedtime every night, same meals, same schedule. Not because it felt good, but because stability was something I could provide even when everything else was chaos. She thought my silence meant I was defeated. That I'd finally accepted my place. What she didn't realize was that I wasn't retreating anymore. I was repositioning. And the moment she forced things into the open, I was already several steps ahead. Walking into the courthouse felt surreal, like I was stepping into someone else's life. The building smelled faintly of disinfectant and old paper, and every footstep echoed louder than it should have. I remember straightening my shirt, hands clammy, telling myself to breathe. She arrived 10 minutes late, sunglasses on, confidence radiating off her like armor. She didn't look at me. When we finally sat across from each other, she leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, like this was an inconvenience she expected to breeze through. Her lawyer spoke first, painting her as the primary caregiver, the nurturing parent who'd been emotionally overwhelmed by my long hours. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I stared at the table and waited. Then it was my turn. My lawyer didn't raise her voice or dramatize anything. She just asked questions. Simple ones. Can you explain your work schedule? Who paid for housing? Who handled medical appointments? Each answer came with receipts, bank statements, text messages, documented timelines. I watched my ex's posture shift as the narrative she relied on started slipping. When asked about her new partner, she hesitated. "That's not relevant," she said sharply. The judge looked up. "It is if it affects stability," he replied. The room went quiet. My ex's lawyer whispered urgently to her, but the damage was already done. Questions turned toward finances, availability, consistency. The things she'd never prepared for because she'd never had to. At one point, she looked directly at me, eyes wide, like she was finally seeing me for the first time. Not tired. Not desperate. Just calm. Grounded. Still. Her new partner didn't show up. Not even a statement. Not even support from the sidelines. I felt a strange, hollow relief watching that absence speak louder than any accusation I could have made. As the judge leaned back, flipping through the file, my heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I didn't know what was coming. I only knew that the story she'd told herself, that I was weak, replaceable, incapable, was unraveling in real time. And as the courtroom fell silent, waiting for the decision, I realized something terrifying and hopeful at the same time. No matter what happened next, she could never undo what had already been revealed. When the judge finally spoke, his voice was calm, almost gentle, like he understood the weight of what he was about to say. He talked about consistency. About presence. About who had actually been there day after day, not just in theory but in practice. I barely breathed as he spoke, every word landing heavy in my chest. Then he said it. Primary custody would be granted to me. For a moment, I didn't feel anything at all. No rush of victory. No urge to cry. Just a strange stillness, like my body didn't know how to react after being braced for impact for so long. I glanced at my ex without thinking. Her face had gone pale, lips pressed together so tightly they almost disappeared. She didn't look angry. She looked shocked. Like the ground had shifted beneath her without warning. Outside the courtroom, she finally broke. "This isn't fair," she said, voice shaking. "You worked all the time. You were never even home. I looked at her and felt nothing. I was working so our child wouldn't go without, I replied quietly. And I was home when it mattered. She tried to argue. Tried to remind me of what we'd been, of how hard things had been for her. Then, almost as an afterthought, she said, "We can still talk." For the baby. That was the moment I understood how temporary I'd always been to her, and how permanent her access to me had felt in her mind. I set boundaries immediately. Communication only through parenting apps. No favors. No financial support beyond what was ordered. No emotional labor. She didn't take it well. Texts started coming in late at night, apologies, guilt, frustration, even hints of regret once her new life didn't turn out the way she'd planned. I didn't respond. Walking away wasn't dramatic. It didn't feel powerful in the moment. It felt quiet. Clean. Necessary. Like closing a door that should have been shut years ago. But as I buckled my child into the car that afternoon, their small hand wrapped around my finger, I felt something new settle in my chest. Not revenge. Relief. And I knew the final chapter of this wasn't about her at all, it was about what came after. Life didn't magically get easier after that. It got quieter first. The kind of quiet that feels uncomfortable when you're used to chaos telling you who you are. The apartment still had empty corners, but they no longer felt accusing. They felt like space, room to breathe, room to rebuild. I focused on routines. Morning breakfasts. Evening baths. Bedtime stories read slowly, even when my voice cracked from exhaustion. My child started sleeping better. So did I. Not because everything was fixed, but because the constant tension was gone. No more waiting for the next argument. No more bracing myself for disappointment. Healing happened in pieces. Some days I felt strong. Other days I felt hollow again, like a bruise that hadn't finished fading. I went to therapy quietly, without telling anyone. I learned how much of my identity had been wrapped around being needed. How easily love had turned into self-erasure. How often I'd ignored my own pain because I thought that's what good men did. My ex tried to circle back once her situation fell apart. The messages were subtle at first. "Hope you're doing well." Then heavier. "I've been doing a lot of thinking." I read them once. Then archived them. No response. No anger. Just distance. She no longer had access to my inner world. I rebuilt slowly, financially, emotionally, physically. I stopped chasing validation. Stopped explaining myself. The more I healed, the less I needed closure from someone who never truly saw me. I learned that peace doesn't announce itself loudly. It settles in when you stop fighting to be understood by the wrong person. One night, after putting my child to bed, I sat on the couch and realized something that almost scared me. I wasn't angry anymore. Not because what happened didn't matter, but because it no longer defined me. I had survived betrayal, exhaustion, and being discarded at my weakest, and still became the safest place my child could land. Healing alone changed me. It made me quieter. Stronger. Harder to manipulate. Untouchable in ways I never was before. And for the first time in my life, that felt like real power.